Welcome to our second section of our new Lunch and Learns. Today we're going to talk about enterprise architecture, and I'd like to introduce enterprise architecture and talk about the why and the what, and in later sections talk about the hows and the whos at another time. So this is just a very high-level overview of enterprise architecture. So the first thing we need to know is what is the definition of enterprise architecture, and this definition here is really my definition of enterprise architecture. There's probably about 20 different definitions out there, but this one is mine. And it's enterprise architecture is the process that translates business strategy into tangible, executable solutions by analyzing current state, designing future state, and creating roadmaps to fill those gaps. And then the process holistically analyzes business information, technology, and technology architectures to create a solution. So basically what you're doing is you're looking at the whole big picture of people, process, and technology. So think about it as a city planning. So when a city planner comes in and is looking at their city, they have all the roads and all the fire stations and police stations, everything is all mapped out. And then when they wanted to look at how they want to change an intersection or whatever, they're looking at their maps. So the same thing happens with enterprise architecture, is that on the master plan, what you have a master plan, but what you're really doing is pinpointing something that you want to fix or want to update or upgrade. So the first thing that you want to do when you create an enterprise architecture practice is you want to select a framework. And currently there are about 20 different frameworks that are available. And here's 4 of them that are pretty highly recognized. The one at the top left is called the Federal Enterprise Architecture Framework. And this framework is used by a lot of government agencies throughout the United States. And then the one on the left, or the right, is the Treasury Enterprise Architecture Framework. So that's just a different way of looking at again, it's around people, process, and technology. But some of the layers are usually looking at applications, the business, technology, and then sometimes information. And then the one at the bottom right is called the TOGAF, and it's by the Open Group Architecture Framework. So what this one is, it's a group of people who are across the United States that have devised a process around looking at enterprise architecture. And then the one in the bottom left-hand corner is called the Zachman Enterprise Architecture Framework. And this is the one that started the whole practice of enterprise architecture back in the late 80s. He had published this model, or it's similar to this model, talking about looking at all the different levels of enterprise architecture and that we need to have these things documented moving forward. And for me, it was just very logical. It makes a whole lot of sense. But over the time, when Zachman first published this, it was really around technology. So it was looking at your databases, your networks, your applications, and your web. And over the past 20 years, since this was published, it has now moved towards a business enterprise and looking at the whole picture of the business. And that's what you look at first. And you look at information and applications second, and then you start looking at technology. And it's one of the ways to be able to make sure that technology is part of the business. So the framework that we've chosen here at Case Western is called the Gartner Framework. And what it does is it takes a look at the environmental trends and the business strategy and feeds them into your future state. And the future state's at the top of the model. And this is where you develop your requirements, your principles, and your models to develop or to make a vision or what the future state should look like. And then at the bottom, you see that this says current state architecture. And what you'll notice is that the future state is much larger than the current state. One of the complications around enterprise architecture is that a lot of architects were spending too much time working on current state. So they were creating a lot of shelfware, a lot of pictures and diagrams, and then they were sitting on the shelf and not being used. So what you want to do is you want to document your future state first, then go down and figure out what do I need to know about current state in order to fill in that gap. And then the way to close the gap is through governing and managing your projects. So think of it as a roadmap that you want to, let's say, have 20 different projects that could happen over the 5 years. Then you would use portfolio management to govern and manage those projects to make sure that they're getting complete. So the idea behind enterprise architecture is to take the business strategies of corporations and being able to turn them into tactical and real, and being able to move the corporation forward. And the reason that enterprise architecture has grown so much in the last, I'd say, 5 to 7 years, is that there's a lot of strategy that corporations put together, but then what they do is they don't, it never gets executed. They're always working on other projects or doing other things. So it's a way to drive to say that you're working on the right projects at the right time to be able to move and grow the corporation. Another way to look at enterprise architecture is at the top is the enterprise is what they call the enterprise context. This is your business trends, your environmental trends that are at the top, and your strategies of how you want to increase revenue. So one of the things at Case Western would be, how do we increase research dollars? So then you would have some different strategies on how you want to go about increasing research dollars. So once you have that documented, and that's really the most important piece, and that's the piece that you need to spend not a whole lot of time, but a good amount of time. And they usually say around 6 to 8 weeks to get all of that documented. Then what you want to do is you want to look at the different viewpoints. So it's at the business viewpoint, the technology viewpoint, and then the information viewpoint, and then in the middle is what you're creating your architecture. So that's your solution. That's going to be your 10, 20 projects that you want to enhance or execute in order to get to executing that strategy. The other thing about this is a part of the Gartner model, is that one of the things around the Gartner model is it is very high level and very doesn't get very tactical. So a lot of corporations will do is they'll take 2 or 3 different frameworks and pull it together to fit their culture. A lot of corporations will use part of the federal model and then part of the TOGAF model in merging it together. But at the same time, because there are 20 different frameworks, there's not a whole lot of standards going for enterprise architecture. So it's really frustrating for the architects to get this process moving along in a corporation. So at Penn State, they have a center on enterprise architecture, and they're really working with 20 groups in order to create some standards and some best practices around enterprise architecture. And what they're hoping from that is then corporations will be able to start this practice up a lot quicker and a lot sooner than what's happening today. Right now, corporations are really questioning the value of enterprise architecture and why is it important. So more to come on standards. So right now what we're going to do is we're going to use the Gartner model, and then we'll pull in some of the things from probably from TOGAF. So here's another framework on or a different viewpoint of what you want to look at when you're creating your framework for enterprise architecture. So at the top, you're looking at the context model. That's your, kind of the ideas, very high level, and you'll notice that the blue at the top where it says business architecture, that's what you really are focusing on, or it's your business processes. And then you put in a little bit of information, application, and technology in there, but what you're really doing is focusing on the processes. And then you move down a level. You want to bring in your information. So how does that data flow between those business processes? And so an example here at the university you could think of is around hiring faculty. It all happens in the departments, and each department does it their own way. And there's bylaws for the university, and then there's also school bylaws. There's a lot. It's very rather complicated. So what you want to do is take a look at those processes and see, are they similar across the board, and then creating one single process. But according to the way the your organization operates, it may or may not fit. So what you need to do is make sure it's going to fit within your business. So then on the conceptual level, you bring in the data. So what data are we going to be pulling in from hiring faculty across the university that would be interesting and being able to answer some of the questions around metrics of how much research dollars are being pulled in by department or by school. And then you take a look at the application architecture and the technology architecture. So the conceptual is where you're starting to put some requirements together and putting some models together. Then on the next level is your logical level, and that's where you start getting a little bit more tactical about what you want to do for future state. So, and as you can see, the business architecture and the technology architecture are in the green. So that means that you're really not focusing so much on that. You're really focusing on the information and the applications. So what are the interactions of the current applications that we have today? What are the applications that we're going to have to create in order to collect that data from those business processes? And then at the bottom is the physical. That's where you start getting into the implementation layer of how this is really going to work. And this is where you pull in the technology layer. So are we going to use Google Mail if we're going to email, send out messages? What are some, are we going to be using some of the application servers, our ERP systems? So you start really getting into the requirements of the system. Okay. So going back to the enterprise context, because that's really the most important piece, is breaking that down a little bit more. So the very first thing you want to take a look at is your principles. And I have a definition later of what a principle is, but it's basically a guideline that you want to live by, and they normally don't change once you've got them created. Then the next area, what you want to do is you want to take a look at the environmental trends. So in higher education, it's the MOOCs that are going on. It's the cost of education. A 3-year-old today is going to cost them over $200,000 to go 1 year. The price is not sustainable. There's financial aid, all the different things that you hear throughout higher education. Those are the things that you want to pull into your environment. And then even on a corporation level, or like a Walmart, maybe they want to increase the number of customers that are coming through the door, looking at their sales and the ways they deliver product. And then the next area you want to look at is the key business processes. So these are the high level. You stay very high level of how of a corporation. So, for example, in higher education, it's the first thing you want to do is you want to recruit students. Then you want to admit students. You want to sign them up for classes. Figure out how much, what credits they are going across from high school into college. Or what particular programs on a graduate level do they want, what faculty members do they want to work with. So that's just at the very beginning, and then going through and, all the way through graduating a student, and then they turn into alumni. So it's at the very high level. You don't want to get real detailed at those, because if you start getting really into the details of all this, then what you're doing is you're boiling the ocean. And so there's an art to enterprise architecture, is trying to make sure that you're not boiling the ocean, that you're keeping things moving forward and coming up with some answers and some solutions to the process, the problems at hand. And then the next area that you want to look at is the high-level requirements. So this is from the enterprise level, the information level, which information, sometimes you'll see it'll say information level, or it may say information and application level, and then some corporations will call it information systems level, and that includes the data and the applications together, because you can't have data without applications or collect that data. And then the other area is the technology level. So what are the requirements? Again, at a high level. So it's pulling in the goals and objectives. So, one of the requirements in higher education will be that we want to share information across higher education. Then the last piece is looking at the relationships of all of those requirements and processes and the trends, and just doing some analysis to what's the solution. Again, pulling everything together. So here's an example or a definition of the principle from the open group, which again was the TOGAF methodology. And basically saying that principles are general rules and guidelines intended to be enduring and seldom amended that inform and support the way in which an organization sets about fulfilling its mission. So it's very high level, very academic, but and I have some examples later, and you can see that you can really start the implications around them can be pretty huge. And what principles do is that you only have about 10 of them. And what it allows you to do, though, is that if someone comes in with a crazy process or a crazy application that they want to use, and you have your guiding principles that will allow you to say no. No, let's see if we can find another solution. And then part of the components of a principle are the name, statement, rationale, and the implications. So I have some examples here. The first one here is to maximize the benefit of the enterprise. And then that's the name of the principle. And then the statement is information management decisions are made to provide maximum benefit to the enterprise as a whole. So it's really, there are assumptions that you're going to assume, well, of course that, management decisions are going to be benefiting the enterprise as a whole. But what it does is it allows you to write these things down and make sure that the assumptions are on paper so that people are setting expectations about what the enterprise looks like. So if we go back to our city planning model, the expectations are, I think in Lyndhurst, you can only have signs that are 10 feet off the ground. So that, to me, is a principle that those are the going forward. So the principle is around the beautification of Lyndhurst. The other one that, the other example is to adhere to security principles and policies. So all systems must adhere to security principles and policies of the university. Information, data will be secured, and access and policies are enforced. So one of the first questions that we always get from an applications area is my data secure? How are you going to make my data secure? So one of the other area around principles is it's allowing people to say, okay, yes, your data is secure, and here's are the principles that we follow. So again, bringing up that policy or the principle around that we adhere to security principles and policies. So those are just, again, it's high level, and it seems pretty basic. But I have an example later, or a case study later, that we'll be going through that, and you'll see that it can bring around some of it can get a little bit political. Okay, so let's really start taking a look at some of the architecture involved. Okay, the first one is the business architecture. So these are the different components that make up the architecture: business processes. We talked about those earlier. Industry verticals. And what industry verticals means is, so we are in the higher education industry vertical. So what are the trends? What is going on in our vertical? If it's a manufacturing of steel, then they would be in the manufacturing vertical. So it's taking a look at making sure you're holistically looking at the industry and where it's going. So, for example, with Borders, that has gone bankrupt and no longer exists, it's really paying attention to the book industry of what's going on. So then also looking at the business model, the organizational culture, and then the organizational model. So the business model that we have here at CASE is that we are a research university, and we have 8 schools that pretty much stand on their own. So that's our business model. And then the organizational model would be how students and faculty traverse through the organization. The next one is the information systems architecture. So that is taking a look at your applications and your data. So this is an example of the faculty life cycle, which I'll show a little bit later. but it's documenting that we're going to get data from the research administration systems, a faculty information system. We're going to be getting our information also from financials, HR, in the registrar system, pulling that all into a data hub, and we're going to integrate that data together. And then at the bottom is where the data is going to be stored, either in an information hub and then your operational data store. So, and you can get into a little bit more detail in this, but what it's trying to show is the data that we're talking about. Okay. The next one is the technical architecture, and this one is just a listing of services that we currently have. So when you're modeling this stuff, you can go back and forth between future and current state. So this one is future state, because if you look at the bottom where it has cloud services, there's the business processes of a service. So that would be your software as a service, your Salesforce.com type service, or even Quest software. And then the next one is the software as a service. That would be software like Workday, which puts HR and payroll out into the cloud. And then platform as a service is moving your infrastructure, your hardware and software out for someone to take care of. And then the last one is infrastructure as a service, which is allowing, moving your whole data center out of here. So again, this is way at the high level. You don't have to get into a whole lot of details, because what we're doing is we're planning our city. Okay. So I've thrown a lot of concepts at you, and what I'd like to do is go through a use case to show you an idea of how to get started, because it is so big and so arduous. But if you remember, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at what we currently have, or our plan, and we're going to focus in on that area. Okay. So one of the initiatives that we've been working on is the Faculty Lifecyle initiative, and what this is doing is taking a look, holistically a look at faculty from the time they are recruited and hired all the way to the time that they are retiring from CASE. And so we're using the enterprise architecture process in this so that we can holistically look at business processes and the information that is being collected on faculty, and what technology is available for us to be able to provide some dashboards for faculty, to be able to provide information to the deans in the provost office. So the first thing you want to do is you want to look at the business context. If you remember, that was the first thing that we looked at the last time, at the very beginning of our discussion today. So some of the current challenges with faculty at CWRU is being able to look at the goals and objectives of the university and being able to apply some intelligence around the performance and diversity and expertise of our faculty. So globalization is a huge initiative within higher education. So being able to figure out, okay, how many faculty are really traveling abroad to other universities? Well, how many collaborations do we have with China or with England? And what are all of the different, how much are they traveling? Are they getting any research dollars from those countries? And then from the school and academic and units, the schools and the departments, right now what we have is we have individual databases that are all over the place, and most of the data around faculty are actually sitting in filing cabinets. So in particular, when you hire a faculty member, it's done at the department level. They have all this paper, and they're putting it in files, sitting in filing cabinets, and then the data retention policy is 3 years. So after 3 years, those whole file folders are destroyed and thrown out. But what happens there is it doesn't give you any information about what type of faculty are actually interested in coming to CASE. And by having that data around what our applicant pool looks like for faculty, then maybe there's a way that we can shift around how we recruit. But right now there is no information. We have no data in order to be able to look at that. So it gets into even the predictive analytics. that you don't even know the questions to ask and what the trends are. But by able to collect that data into electronic ways, then we'll be able to answer some of these questions. And then the Provost Faculty Database is a standalone system. This started out as a spreadsheet 20, 30 years ago and has now become a small SQL database. And people are calling the Provost office, asking questions about faculty, and it's becoming the system of record, which it's too small and it doesn't have the security and the robustness in order to be able to be a source for faculty. And then manual input to processes are still being used. People are still filling out forms and walking over to the HR office in order to put in faculty contracts. So there's a lot of duplicated efforts in maintaining all of these separate databases. And then there's a lot of the data gaps. The example that I had mentioned earlier about having no information on applicants that are applying for faculty positions. So that's just the tip of the iceberg with this project. So pulling the initiative in and looking at our strategic planning for the university, what we're hoping is that this faculty lifecycle initiative will help develop and implement and assess our strategic plan, that it's going to be able to provide some data for our new strategic plan in order to show that our strategic plan is successful. So it's being able to create some metrics around that. Again, and then that's the second point of providing the data with measures of success. And then the fourth one is to being able to foster interdisciplinary collaborations and research. So one of the ideas is being able to pull faculty can put out what kind of interests that they're looking at for research dollars. And then there might be someone over in the medical school in the biology department that's going and talking to someone over maybe even in the humanities department going, hey, there's this grant and I see that you're interested in this piece, I'm interested in that piece. Maybe we can put our heads together and come up with a proposal to get some more grant funding. And then the last piece is just addressing issues and efficiency around and transparency. So there's an awful lot of work to bring a faculty member on board and to support their research, to support their teaching, and there's a lot of duplication of effort. So looking at our business processes for all of those and being able to make people's lives easier, the administrators' lives easier, but in particular the faculty easier, so that they can bring up a dashboard and look at how their advisees, they can look at their research and look at where their spend is, look at their interests and see if there's other interests on campus to create some collaboration. So, and then what we did is we pulled in some external trends. And this was a quote out of an article that was published in 2006. And it says, the structure of the American Research University is rapidly changing, and the composition of the academy's most valuable asset, the faculty, and the essential nature of their work are being transformed. The research university model has evolved to function within a more globalized, knowledge-based economy with powerful privatizations and market forces and advanced technologies. And then at the heart of this transformation has been the restructuring of the faculty life cycle. So these are the academic appointments, the academic work, and the academic careers. So it's not only just having some person show up on campus and teach a few courses and do a little bit of research. The faculty are getting more and more pressures to globalize, to be able to privatize of their research. So they have a lot more pressure on themselves. And at the same time, we're trying to figure out how to cut costs in higher education, because it's just not sustainable being able to have a 3-year-old, spending $200,000 a year in tuition. Okay, so the goals and objectives of our initiative is to coordinate the information architecture. We're really going to be focusing on pulling in data around appointments and leaves and promotion, tenure, teaching and advising, the research that they do, honors and awards for our faculty, and then service to the profession. So one of the areas that faculty are required to do every year is to do some type of community service around Northeast Ohio and so that's part of their requirements to be a faculty member here at Case. And then the other the other goal is to be able to bridge some of the gaps between some of the multiple data systems. So, as a lot of you know, we have issues with duplicate IDs for faculty because we have all of our faculty are not just paid here at Case, but they are also faculty out into the 4 hospitals that in Northeast Ohio. And then also the next one is to standardize and resolve the data consistencies. So there's, again, I just brought up the example of duplicate network IDs. That's just one small example. And then being able to save time with faculty and staff in reducing that duplication. So that they can spend more time looking at analytics, that they can and doing some more value added to process. And then supporting the marketing of faculty achievements and accomplishments. So it's our prestige of Case Western Reserve University being able to go out and market the great things that our faculty are doing in, curing cancer or looking at tuberculosis. And then the last one is to advance the goals and objectives of the university. So here's a few principles, and here's where I'm going to show you that these can be a little bit contentious, but we are pretty dead set on making sure that these principles stick. So the first one is to maximize the benefit to the university. That faculty life cycle decisions are made to provide maximum benefit to the university as a whole. Again, making sure that we get the return on investment. So whatever we're investing in our systems and going through all this process and changing the university, that we are going to get the return on all that investment. And then the next one is the information management is everybody's business, that all academic units at the university participate in the faculty life cycle decisions that they need to accomplish the business objectives. So what we're saying here is that if there's a process that we want to implement across all the departments of the university, that everyone is going to participate in that, and that people cannot say, no, I'm not going to do it, I'm going to go and do it my own way. So again, there's going to be a lot of change management strategy in helping the university move along some of these standardized, centralized processes. And then the next one is the data is an asset. The faculty data are an asset and a value to the institution and needs to be managed accordingly. So that's looking at data quality, making sure that if you see something that doesn't look right, taking being active and getting the data fixed, wherever the source system is. And then the last one is data is shared and accessible, that users need to access the data necessary to perform their duties. And therefore, the data should be shared across the university functions and the academic units. So again, it's going back to looking at schools and departments and sharing the information that's pertinent to the university, so that across the university, so other academic units. So, for example, in the provost office, they're looking at data around hiring statistics and contract statistics, in trying to create a big picture, and then also being able to report back to the federal agencies. Institutional research will tell you that they're getting more and more and more reports, and as technology is changing, and information is more at your fingertips, they're asking for more and more complicated reports and analysis. And right now, these are all just very manual and pulling all these different spreadsheets together. So being able to have a system where you can push a button and out comes a report. Okay, so the next area that you want to take a look at for this in our example of the faculty life cycle is architecture. So I just have a couple of slides on here. So the first one, this is at the business architecture, and this is called an anchor model. And the first thing what you want to do is this is your map. This is the map that we talked about in city planning. So think about this as a map of a city. This particular one, what I did is that we focused only on the faculty. We did not try to put in all of the student activities that are going on at the university. So we're just focusing on a piece of the city plan. So at the top, it's split into two areas, the academic area and then the administration area. So at the top, the undergraduate, graduate, and professional, those are the schools, the 8 schools, and they all fit into one of those 3 buckets. And then in the middle are the students' support services and the research services. So these were services that we thought would, from a functional standpoint, that help working that faculty can go to help get their job done. So, for example, student affairs. If they have an issue with a student, the first place that they would go to would be notifying student affairs. Looking at undergraduate studies and helping, if they're advisors to a student, looking at all the requirements for someone to get a bachelor's degree. And then enrollment management is your students. Graduate studies is the graduate students are applying to particular programs that are available at the university. And then the registrar, of course, they're the ones that are putting the students in your classes. And then on the research support side, it's the libraries, the research databases that are available for research, the core facilities that are available. So, for example, animals is a core facility. So you may need some animals to do some research. Research administration is where you're putting your proposals and getting your awards, and they administering the grant aspect of your research. And then tech transfer, that is looking at what you can privatize if there's some research that can go into creating a new company. And then undergraduate research, one of the things that CASE is really known for is being able to provide research for their undergraduates. So being able to match up students with faculty. And then you'll notice that there's some boxes on the outside. Those are the external entities that are looking into the picture around faculty. So you have your students on one side, and then your affiliate hospitals, your sponsors so that would be your sponsors for your research, and then your research peers. And that could be subcontractors. It could be someone at another university. A lot of research grants that are coming out of the federal government right now are a lot, 4 or 5 different universities need to be working together to, let's say, examine kidney disease. And then at the bottom of the anchor model is your administration. So your campus planning, your office space, classrooms, your research space. Campus services is purchasing, accounts payable, getting your research paid for. And then HR and immigration is your payroll and your benefits. And then finance would be the accounting that goes behind the grants that you're working on. So that's at a high level what an anchor model looks like. So the other area in business architecture you want to look at is process. So at the very high level, what we did is we selected those high level processes that we want to take a look at, going from research and or from recruiting and hiring, going through teaching and research, and then professional development. So those are all the different processes that a faculty needs to participate in order to be successful at a university, a research university. So, and then the arrow is pulling all of that data across all those processes and looking at creating a data hub. And then here's another, this is looking at the information layer. So here are all the different applications that are available today, and being able to pull all of that data from those applications into a data hub. And then you see, this is the same example as earlier in the presentation. So these are the shared technology infrastructure services. So being able to pull out the technology that we already are using. So for example, identity management we have for faculty, collaboration services, the calendaring, the email. So if we create an application or a data hub that's able to send out notices, then we're going to use the technology that we currently have. So there's the presentation layer, and then in the middle is your infrastructure, and then on the side is your integration services. So the presentation, it could be a portal, it could be a mobile device, it could be the web. And then on the integration side, it's pulling in the analytics and the transactions from those applications in that middleware. So there's, and then the databases that are on there. Okay. So that's pretty much at a very high level, just an example of how to use to use enterprise architecture and what kind of project that you would be looking at. So this particular project, we're looking at from soup to nuts of faculty here at CASE, and trying to, one, help their lives be a little bit easier. They get frustrated at every other day asking for the same information, so that they can be able to put in their information once, and then it's shared across all the applications. And then the other area is being able to, when they do publish reports or publish their research, that it's easily being able to collect it, and they're not having to do a whole lot with it. So the last area that I wanted to talk about in this Lunch and Learn is enterprise architecture, and why now? Why are we talking about this? So, and these are my reasons as to why I think enterprise architecture is important, and why we need to really start talking about creating a practice here. Not just I should say just talking about it, but let's get this practice going here at CASE. And the other thing is that it's just not here at CASE. There's a whole group called ITANA, which is part of Internet2 and EDUCAUSE, that are enterprise architects in higher education. And it's actually across the world. So we have information from our people from Canada and from France that are participating in this group. So one of the new trends is in higher education is that the colleges and universities are hiring enterprise architects to begin their practice in higher education. But most practices in higher education are around, people who have been around for 2-3 years. So we are on the cutting edge in looking at enterprise architecture. But again, one of the reasons that people are really starting to move forward that is the whole turmoil and the change that's going to be happening in higher education in the next 3 to 5 years. So going back to the slide, this is one of the trends, is reducing higher education. So right now our processes are all different across the schools. We are not consistent in a lot of processes. And researching around the faculty is that there's university bylaws and there's schools bylaws, and what you want to do through enterprise architecture is to create one university. So this is one way I look at it, is that because higher education is changing, we've got to have some way, some process in order, or methodology in order to put some organization to the chaos that's going on now. And then the other reason that I believe why we need to be looking at this is the future of technology. Right now we have these ERP systems, and they're massive systems, and the technology is moving towards these services. So, and that they're all split out, looking at software as a service, Salesforce.com, even the QuickBase that we have today using our track system is software as a service. So in my viewpoint is, instead of me having to sign into this humongous ERP system to approve a rec, I'm just going to have an icon on my mobile phone that says approve rec. So it's a service that I'm going to be providing inside a middle of a massive process to be able to approve that rec. I don't need to sign on to this humongous system. I just need to hit my icon and approve the rec. So I believe that we're going to be splitting out these massive systems that were created, started being created in the 1980s and spreading them all out. So right now you've got the university who's trying to, centralize some of the processes and provide them efficiency and straighten out some of the spaghetti code that's going on. And at the same time, you've got technology that's just is splitting it out. So by that, you need to have a master plan. of how you want to go about this, because there's just so many different services that are out there that are popping up every day as software as a service. And then at the same time, you've also got the higher education craziness that's going on. So you need to have a master plan, and enterprise architecture is going to get you to that master plan. So those are the questions and answers. So that's very at a high level what enterprise architecture is. And what we talked about today was what is enterprise architecture and why it's important. And then I kind of gave you a little bit of flavor of how we're applying it to here at CASE. And then at the next, at other sessions, what we can talk about is the how and the who. And especially in particular, the who's involved with enterprise architecture, and why is it important for them to be involved. And then the how is getting really into the modeling of creating your principles and your requirements and the models to get what where you're going on this. So I would like to open it up to questions and answers, or questions. Oh, there are no questions. Okay. So that's it in a nutshell, and thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Thank you.